All right. In the words of the great Lane Kiffin, get your popcorn ready. Hopefully your experience is a little bit better than his was. But it is a ladies' movie night. It is a great time to connect. And the movie is God's Not Dead. In God We Trust. And that is on September 17th from 7 p.m. to whatever time the movie gets done at. The cost is $5 plus concessions. And if you want to sign up for it, sign up in the lobby. It's about that time of year again. It is nearly October, which is my favorite month, partially because it's my birthday month, and because we have Trunk or Treat coming up on October 25th at 5 to 6:30. It is an event that we do every year for the kids in our community, and we do need volunteers to help plan it. And if you are interested in helping planning it, or interested in helping at all, it's all hands on deck. Look into the lobby. There should be a sign-up sheet in there, and hope to see you there. And we've got a connection potluck coming up on October 6th. So bring your best dish. Mine is a chili that may or may not have a secret sauce in it. It tastes really good, guys. And it is a great chance to connect with people and learn more about fall small groups. And before we get into worship, find 2 or 3 people and say good morning to them.
Well, hey, once again, I want to welcome you to Church on a Line today. As excited to be kicking off a brand new series this weekend that we're calling Asking for a Friend. And it's a series that really kind of came out of some conversations we've been having on our Tuesday night Alpha group. As the first night we gathered together, I actually had them take a note card and write some of the biggest life questions that they had. Some of the biggest life questions they had. Now, to be clear, when I say life questions, I'm not talking about like those questions like, why does your nose run and your feet smell, right? Like I can see some of you're scratching your heads with that one right there. Or if 7-Eleven is open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, then why are there locks on the doors? Or how about this last one? Maybe my favorite, why are there interstate highways in Hawaii? Right? And like those, admittedly, while those are good questions in life, the truth is whether we find an answer to those particular questions or not, really doesn't matter a whole lot for our lives. But rather the questions that we're talking about, and the questions we're going to get into in this series are really questions that regardless of where you're at when it comes to your walk with Christ, right? Whether you've been walking with Him for years or you're still kind of kicking the tires when it comes to this whole Jesus thing, there are really kind of questions that I think we all wrestle with. We all wrestle with in our lives. By inviting you really into this 4-week conversation as we look at some biblical answers to some of life's biggest questions. Either those questions like what happens after we die? Do God and science contradict? Why is there suffering in this world? Or how could a loving God ever send someone to hell? And so we're going to be wrestling kind of through some of these questions. And by kicking things off today and really launching into this series with this question of why do some people experience miracles and others don't? Why do some people experience miracles and others don't? You ever asked that question or maybe thought that question to yourself? Which right up top, can I just say that it's a question that I love. I love because just the fact, but how many know, just the fact that you're asking that question acknowledges that you believe that some people do in fact experience the miraculous still in their lives. Right? That some people have walked away from a car accident that they should have never walked away from. Or that some people have been healed beyond just medical explanation. Or that some people have seen and experienced some things in their life that just there seems to be no logical explanation for. That someone maybe in your life, maybe you yourself have gotten a job that you know you were not qualified for. That if not for just the very favor of God upon your life, God who made a way where there seemed to be no way, you shouldn't be where you're at in life. There's a book called Miracles Today by Dr. Craig Kinnear, and it was a study done on some of the hundreds of millions of people across the world that every year have reported or having seen or experienced some type of miracle in their lives. And so in one of these studies he reports on, in the study he really highlighted one particular one, which was done in relation to 1,000 doctors who were surveyed in the U.S. And they were asked this question: do you believe in miracles? And catch this, over 75% of doctors said absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I've seen some things in the operating room. I've seen things happen through surgery that cannot be explained through medical science alone. Psalm 77:14 puts it this way, says, "You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples." And I just love the fact that it says performs, not just performed. So how many know he's not the God that just did things 2,000 years ago? He's the God who's still working and doing amazing, miraculous things today. As the Bible says, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. In other words, the same God who parted the Red Sea back then is still making a way where there seems to be no way today. The same God who brought sight to the blind is bringing vision to those who feel lost in life. Again, we still serve a miracle-working God. Which again brings us back to this question. Then why do some people experience miracles and others don't? Well, before we kind of really answer that question, I think we got to ask a few questions about the question itself, right? As we talked about in our series on the book of Titus a couple weeks ago, how many know sometimes we can get ourselves in a lot of trouble when we try to answer the wrong question? And so we got to kind of clarify, really, kind of really get to the root of the question itself. As let's be real, sometimes we can ask questions, but we're not really asking to learn as much as we're asking to vent. You ever experienced this? Where you're asking a question, and not so much because you're looking for an answer, but really you're just venting. Like there's not a kid who is in the room or in our lives at some point has been, asked by their parents, what were you thinking, right? Or why didn't you clean your room? And every kid knows that you as a parent, you're not looking for an answer in that moment, right? Because let's be real, no answer in that moment is going to satisfy the question. Like there's nothing a kid in that moment can say that's going to go, oh, you're right. Right? Like, yeah, why is your room such a mess still when I told you to clean it up like 3 days ago? Well, there's some robbers who broke in and they messed up my whole room. They were looking for something. I chased them off. Like, you'd be like, yeah, okay, sure. Right? That doesn't change the fact I asked you to clean your room and you didn't clean the room. And again, I think we need to start here because a lot of times we ask questions not so much with the desire to hear the answer or learn, as much as it's about venting. Venting, because again, in that moment, we're not really wanting to know the answer to that question. We're just upset because much like the frustration with a kid who, we ask them to do something, they don't do it. It's the same in kind of our relationship with God. Because he didn't do what we wanted him to do when we wanted it. We're left with this frustration. Right? And so we have to start there. Now, are we asking to actually learn, or are we actually asking just to vent? Which brings us to something else. But before kind of asking for a friend, I got to ask as a friend. And that's, are you actually open to the answer? Are you actually open to receiving the answer to this question? Matthew 12:38. There's this interesting conversation that happens between the religious leaders and Jesus. And it says one day some teachers of the religious law and Pharisees, they came to Jesus and said, "Teacher, we want you to show us a miraculous sign to prove your authority. In other words, prove who you say you are." But Jesus replied, "Only an evil, adulterous generation would demand a miraculous sign, but the only sign I will give them is the sign of the prophet Jonah." As we find Jesus in this moment not doing the miracle, catch this, not because he's not able to do it, but because Jesus knows even if he did it, how many know it wouldn't have made a difference to these religious leaders? And listen, how do we know that? Because he's Jesus, right? Like he's been doing miracles left and right. In fact, the very reason there was a crowd gathered in that moment was because of them seeing and witnessing one amazing miracle after the next. Like I could just imagine when this conversation happens, there had to have been some people in the crowd see a miracle, like that's the reason I'm here, right? Like I was blind yesterday and now I can see today. And probably somebody else in the crowd like, hey, that's my story. Like I was dead yesterday and now I'm alive today because of Jesus, right? Like he'd been performing miracle after miracle, and yet it wasn't enough. They'd already made up their mind. They didn't want to actually hear the answer. When I was doing research on this message, I came across a story of a lady by the name of Delia Knox. This woman, she'd been paralyzed for about 22 years as the result of this horrific car accident, which, speaking of miracles, like she should not have walked away from this accident alive. Totaled everything. It was horrific. But this accident, as a result of it, it left her paralyzed. Until one day she walked into a church service, and after the service was over, an invitation was given to come up front and to receive prayer. And so she receives that invitation. She comes up and the pastor prays for her, and just a miracle happens. She's able to get up and walk away from that wheelchair after 22 years of paralysis. 22 years of paralysis. Now, the reason why I share this with you is because so often people are like, well, if I could just see a miracle, Pastor, it'd be so much easier to believe if I could just see a miracle. And yet, even though her doctors, Kesses, have verified it, have said there's no medical explanation for this, even though the moment in which it happened was actually recorded on video. In fact, you can search up her story on YouTube, Delia Knox, and you can see the video of it happening. And yet, even with all that, we still struggle to believe it, don't we? We still struggle to believe whenever we hear some of these stories of the miraculous. In fact, some of the critics and naysayers of this miracle who've seen it, you know what their best explanation for it is? Is what she must have been faking it. Faking it for 22 years. Now, think about this. Do you know what kind of commitment you have to fake paralysis for 22 years? Like, can you imagine only to wake up one day like, this is the day it all pays off. 22 years I've been pulling off this con, right? Like, but today's the day. It's going to all pay off for me. Like, that would be some serious commitment, which might help to explain why Jesus says what he does in this text, saying the only miracle or sign I'm going to give you is the sign of Jonah. Now, what's the sign of Jonah? Well, for those who may be unfamiliar with the story of Jonah was a story of this prophet who wanted to kind of do his own thing, go his own way. And so rather than obeying God's direction, tries to run thousands of miles in the opposite direction to Tarsus and finds himself in the middle of a storm. Ultimately gets the captain and the crew of the boat. They find out that he's running from God, and so they throw him overboard. That doesn't seem like the best of solutions, right? It seems like there had to be some other options, but they throw him overboard, and he ends up sinking down in the water and being swallowed by a fish. And in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights. So when Jesus is referencing this sign, he's actually foretelling what's about to happen. He's foretelling, his own, eventual death and resurrection from the cross, right? In 3 days and 3 nights. In other words, what Jesus was trying to get them to see was not just some miraculous sign, because he knew that in and of itself is not going to convince anybody, but rather what's really going to convince you is the story of his death and resurrection. It's the story, the good news of the gospel. In fact, here's what I'm trying to say. I put in my notes this way: is a miracle won't change your mind, but the gospel will change your heart. A miracle won't change your mind, but how many know the gospel will change your heart? And if you do not have a changed heart, that's why it matters so much. How many know you'll never see the miracles of God for what they are? You will debate them, you will fight them, you will push back on them, you will argue them, you will doubt them. But on the flip side of that, how many know once God gets a hold of your heart, when the gospel message becomes real to you in your life, it's amazing how you start to see miracles that you didn't ever see before in your life. The miraculous. Which brings me to something else that as a friend I got to ask. When it comes to this question, why do some people experience miracles and others don't? And that is, who are some people? I mean, have you really thought about that? Like, who are some people? Because I found that often one of the biggest struggles actually seeing miracles in one's life is that most miracles you experience, how many know they don't look very miraculous? Most miracles, I would dare say that you experience every day in everyone's life, they don't always look very miraculous. You know, when the people of Israel were in bondage in Egypt for 400 years, God delivers them with one mighty, amazing miracle after miracle after miracle. From a breaking down of Pharaoh's heart through the 10 plagues, eventually letting God's people go, to the splitting of the Red Sea, to the everyday miraculous provision for them through 40 years of wandering through the wilderness and the desert, from bread from heaven, manna, only to have some of these miracles seem to suddenly stop. To the point where the Jewish people, they start to ask the question, does God even still do miracles anymore today? Like he did back in the day. Like, but hey, like, because I'm looking around like what has he done for us lately? And so God, in response to this, responds to them by taking them on this stroll down memory lane. And we find it in this passage in Deuteronomy 29. By reminding them of just some of the miraculous ways he's provided for them. Saying with your own eyes, I saw those great trials, those signs and great wonders, but to this day, the Lord has not given you a mind that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear. Yet the Lord says, during the 40 years that I led you through the wilderness, your clothes did not wear out, nor did the sandals on your feet. In other words, I think you guys are missing it. You've missed it. You missed the fact that you've been rocking the same pair of Nike shoes for 40 years. You've been rocking that same sweatshirt that you got way back in college all these years. And what God's trying to say is, listen, I'm just trying to point out all the little things that I've been doing in your life that maybe you've lost sight of. And they missed it for the same reason we so often miss it, is most of the miracles that he does in our life, again, they don't always look very miraculous at first sight. But if you learn at times to just take a step back and with a heart of gratitude, a look again at God's work in your life, I think you'd find your fridge, how many know it's a miracle? Your marriage is a miracle. Your spouse is a miracle. Your kids are a miracle. Listen, that job, I know it might feel like a curse, but it is a blessing. It is a miracle of God. As why do some people experience miracles and others don't? Listen, that's a fair question, but can I challenge you to maybe ask a better question today? And it's this, isn't why do some people experience miracles and others don't, but rather why do some people see God work in miraculous ways and others don't? Why do some people see the miraculous in their lives and others don't? And look, I think it starts with gratitude. And this decision to see those everyday miracles for what they are in our life, for what they are, which is a miracle of God. And speaking of those everyday miracles in one's life that you have that maybe you never asked for, have you ever stopped to think about the miracle of a beating heart? Just how miraculous that is? As just a few facts about your heart that maybe you didn't know is, catch this, your heart beats over 100,000 times per day and has been doing it every day of your life. No wonder some of us come in here feeling exhausted and worn out, right? Like that might be the reason right there. Second thing about your heart pumps about 1.5 gallons of blood every single minute. Every single minute. Through catches around 60,000 miles of blood vessels throughout your body. Now, to put 60,000 miles in context for us today, listen, that's enough to go around the world twice. That's all in you, right? And look, if you're still not impressed, thinking like, oh, what's the big deal about this, Pastor? Like everybody's heart beats. No, it doesn't. Like what's the number one killer of people in the world today? It's still heart disease, right? It's still heart disease. As every day, 183,671 hearts stop beating. That means that by the time I finish a sentence, 127 hearts have stopped beating, but not yours. Not yours. And on top of that, have you ever stopped to see somebody, maybe in the movies or maybe in your everyday life where someone's heart seemed to stop, only for the paramedics to show up and to bring that heart back to life? Like how incredible that is. Is that not like the craziest thing to think they just push that heart back to life? And yet, listen, my heart, catch this, my heart has been beating for the last 49 years without anyone pushing on it. Or has it? Or has it? As look, I'm here to testify in a God who, I'm telling you, through those 49 years, has never skipped a beat. Has never skipped a beat. Again, it's a miracle. Those everyday miracles that I think so many of us, if we're not careful, can just take for granted. So I'm just trying to get us to understand that while the question of why do some people experience miracles and others don't, it's a good question. Maybe the better question to be asked is why do some people see God work in miraculous ways in their lives and others don't? And again, I think it's that we don't always see, again, the miracles for what they are because most miracles often don't look very miraculous at first. Which brings us to something else. If we hope to see God work in miraculous ways in our lives. And that is that while it starts with seeing miracles for what they are, how many know it also takes a willingness to see the miracle through? It also takes the willingness and the boldness and the audacity to see the miracle through. As a great story that speaks to how this works, it is also one of the more unusual and maybe uncomfortable miracles that we see Jesus perform in the Gospels. And we find it in Mark chapter 8, starting verse 22, it says, they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand, led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes, I told you it was gross, spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him. Jesus asked, do you see anything? To which his response, as you're going to come to discover, is one of the most, I would argue, one of the most faith-filled responses you'll ever find to a miracle of God in someone's life. It says he looked up and said, I see people, they look like trees walking around. In other words, it's good. It's better than it was before, but it's not quite what I had hoped for or expected or thought. And something I've learned about myself over the years is that when it comes to dealing with conflict in life, I can handle it. I can deal with it. At times, I dare say, I actually embrace it. I actually love working through it. As long as that conflict is somebody else's conflict and not mine, right? As long as it's helping somebody navigate the conflict in their lives and it's not a conflict with me that I'm having to try to now navigate. For example, like if I'm at a restaurant and you bring me the wrong food or it's an undercooked dish or it's just not exactly what I ordered, rather than make a scene, rather than run the risk of a conflict and drawing attention to this issue that I've got with my food, how many know I'm more likely to just make the best of it. Rather than send it back, rather than make a scene, I'm just going to make the best of it. And I know some of you are watching this right now, you're like, never. Like if I don't get the right dish, like if there's a carrot out of place, like I'm sending it back. Like that's what you do. In fact, I can still remember being at a steak place that a pastor friend of mine had recommended, and he kept raving about it. He was so excited to take me there. And so we get there, and it comes time to order. And so I asked for my steak to be cooked to medium, and only to get this thing back on my plate, and it looked like a charcoal brisket. I mean, it was bad. It was like rock solid hard. And so rather than make a scene, again, rather than create some conflict, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to make the best of it. It's good enough. So as I took the A1, I'm dumping it on there, trying to make it tender enough to actually even get a knife through. And my friend, he's watching this. He's like, hey man, you don't have to eat that, right? Like we can just send it back. They'll make you a whole new steak. And so kind of begrudgingly, I let him wave the waiter back over, and the waiter's apologizing profusely. Like, hey, we'll get you a new one. How do you want it, like medium? Okay, we'll send it back to the cook. And so they do that. It comes back, and now the steak that I got, it's on the other side of the spectrum. Like this thing, I'm pretty sure it's still mooing. Like there's so much blood there, you would have thought I was making a steak for Count Dracula. Like it was terrible. And yet again, not wanting to make conflict again and be that difficult customer, I just settled. Right? I settled on it's fine. I'll just make the best. It's good enough. It's good enough. And as a result, I spent like the next 4 hours still chewing on this one piece of meat, right? So getting back to our passage, and why I say that this man's statement to Jesus is really pretty bold and pretty audacious when you think about it. As after Jesus does a healing work in this man's life, while it's better than it used to be, it still wasn't as good as it was supposed to be. What was better than it used to be, it still wasn't as good as it was supposed to be. And so instead of going, it's fine, this is good enough, by falsely assuming that how it is how it'll always be, he has the faith, he has the audacity, he has the persistence and the boldness to go back to Jesus and trust him to do it again. Oh, come on, somebody. But believing that if it's not all good yet, then God must not be all done yet. If it's not all good, God is not done. And of course, I think just as powerful is Jesus' response to this man's request. As notice what he says in verse 25. It says, once more Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Notice he didn't say, I gave it to you once. That should be good enough. It should be good enough that's the best it's going to get. No, it says once more. Once more, he released his power. Once more, he came to them in the exact spot that he needed. Once more, Jesus was willing to work and act so that the man could be free and the man could experience healing in his life. I wonder, how many of us would be willing to have that kind of faith? To trust God to do it again? That's something you got to get about miracles in the Bible. It's interesting enough, miracles are rarely referenced as miracles, but rather as signs. Because the purpose in a miracle is not to go looking for the miracle, but to look to the miracle worker. As again, miracles were not meant to be signs pointing to something, but rather to someone. In fact, it might help to explain why we never see Jesus ever perform a miracle the same way throughout the Gospels. Like it's always sort of a different method or technique or process because, again, he wasn't trying to instill faith in something. He was trying to instill faith in someone. Because he understands this tendency we can have to go chasing after a formula or a process rather than pursuing the person of Jesus. Focusing on our effort, on the technique of which we approach faith instead of the passion and the desire he's actually looking for from our faith. A few weeks ago, like many of you, I found myself watching the Olympics, and as I was sitting down, I was getting ready to watch the current U.S. basketball team take the court to go on to win gold. They shared some stories from some of the previous dream teams to kind of set the stage for this. And specifically, they were reflecting back on the dream team that had a young LeBron, a young D. Wade, and an older, seasoned Kobe Bryant at this time. But like Kobe Bryant, he was kind of the old head, the leader of the team by this point. And there's this great story they shared in the documentary of how like the first day that they were all together, they get to the gym only to notice that Kobe Bryant had been there like 2 hours earlier. Like he'd already worked up a sweat. He'd already had basically a full-on practice before they ever even got there to begin to practice. And there was sort of this light bulb moment in their minds like, oh, this is why he keeps beating us. This is why he keeps dominating us on the floor. And so seeing kind of his technique, well, he gets up at 5 in the morning. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to adopt the technique. We're going to get there at 5 in the morning. Like that's the answer. That's the secret sauce. Now, stick with me on this, but let's be real. It's not really a divine insight necessarily to say to a person who wants it, the person who wants it more is going to work harder for something, right? Like the person who wants it more, they're going to put more effort into it. And yet what I find is that often we'll take people who've achieved greatness in an area of their life or success in an area of their life, and in identifying the secret sauce of their success, we immediately look for technique, don't we? We want the quick fix. We want the formula. We want, again, the secret sauce. Thinking, well, they worked out this many times, or they studied this long, or they did all these different things, as if the technique is the separator. When in reality, it wasn't the technique as much as it was a desire to improve that outweighed the desire to stay the same. It was a desire to improve that outweighed the desire to stay the same. That was the difference. Understanding that technique, how many know, works itself out if the desire is the thing that's already there. This desire to see change, this desire to see the miraculous, more than the desire to just stay the same, to just settle. Let me give you an example of this. The disciples, they come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, will you teach us how to pray? And his response is what we typically refer to as the Lord's Prayer. And of course, we often love to focus on the pattern, don't we? The technique of it, the repetitiveness of it. So a lot of us we know, even if you haven't been in church much, most of us know the Lord's Prayer, the pattern of it. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this what? Yeah, this day. Like you know it. Like you know the pattern. Our daily bread. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. Again, we know the pattern. We know the technique. It's easy to remember that, but I would argue in the process, if we're not careful, I think we can miss the point of what Jesus was actually trying to teach them in regards to prayer. As Jesus, again, knowing our tendency to want to try to look for a formula, to look for the quick fix, we can get caught up in the technique. But notice what he shares next, going on to share this story immediately after he gives this teaching on seeking him in prayer. And we find it in Luke 11, as this is right after he's instructed them on the Lord's Prayer. Verse 5 says, then Jesus said to them, suppose you have a friend and you go to him at midnight and say, friend, lend me 3 loaves of bread. And I got to pause just for a moment there, because all I know is this guy is a whole lot more gracious than I think I would have been in that moment. Like there's chance, I'm pretty sure I would not be referring to this guy who shows up at my door at midnight, waking me up as a friend, right? But he does. It says, verse 6 says, a friend of mine on a journey has come to me, and I have no food to offer him. And suppose the one inside answers, don't bother me, the door's already locked, and my children and I are in bed. I can't get up and give you anything. I tell you, even though he will not get up and give you the bread because of friendship, check this out, because of your shameless audacity. Your shameless audacity, he will surely get up and give you as much as you need. In other words, listen, you guys are so focused on the technique or the method, not realizing the words aren't the points. The level of desire and persistence. That's the point. The level of audacity that you come to God with is the point. And I'm just telling you, you cannot have a shameless audacity that God responds to if the only response you're willing to give in any given moment is, I'm fine. It's good enough. I'll just take whatever's given to me. Let me pick on something for just a second here by telling you that you might not be fine. That you might not be fine. And I know you've told everyone you're fine, and I know you've told them it's fine, but I'm telling you, again, if it's not all good, you can trust God's not all done. And some of us, we need to quit believing the lie that we're content, when in reality, we've just settled. Settled in a place in our relationship, or settled in a place with our calling in our life, or settled in a season that we were never meant to settle in. When it comes to some of those promises of God in our life that are still a work in progress. There's this moment in Joshua 10 that I love, in which the sun actually stands still. Talk about a miracle. The sun stands still in response to this prayer Joshua has. But the moment before the sun stands still, it says the army was willing to do an all-night march. Look, I found that more often than not, we're willing to pray some big, bold, audacious, sun stand still type prayers, but very few of us are generally willing to do the all-night marches, to go back, to trust God with the kind of faith to believe Him to do it again and again and again. And listen, I'm just encouraging you, I just want to challenge you, look, to press in. To press in, like if there's an area of your life where it's not all good, you can trust He's not all done. But will you have the shameless audacity to keep going back, to knock on the door again and again and again, until God brings it to completion, the very thing He started in your life? And so Jesus, in fact, He continues on where we're highlighting the what He's after in this, and where the shameless audacity comes from. In verse 9, He goes on to say, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be open. Now, to be clear, just make sure we're on the same page theologically. This is not about like name it, claim it kind of theology. I don't believe that every time you ask in faith, God is going to respond in that exact way, in that exact timeline that you might have asked for. But I do believe this. I believe we serve a God who every time you cry out to Him, every time you pray, every time you press into Him, always responds. And He always responds with what is best for our lives. What is best for our lives. And can I tell you, the one prayer that He always answers is that prayer for more of Him in your life. That prayer for more of Him in your life. And so Jesus challenges us to ask with a shameless audacity that comes not from the confidence in what we're asking for, but in who we're asking to receive from. Understanding that the power in prayer is not in what you pray for, but it's who you're praying to, right? And so Jesus tells us this passage to ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, and then I love this, knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be open. So let me put this in more relatable terms as we begin to wrap this up. I can remember when Austin was a kid, I had to sort of teach him proper door knocking etiquette. Because he had this habit of, whenever we'd go visit grandparents or visit some friends, he'd go up to the door and it immediately was just, this incessant just started pounding on the door, knocking nonstop until they came and answered the door. And so I had to, take a moment to hey, buddy, just chill, just chill for a moment. Like you don't need to go through all that. Like all you need to do is just 3 knocks, and then just wait a moment, right? And then if they don't come to the door, they don't answer after 20 seconds, maybe a little bit firmer, 3 knocks. And if they still don't come, chances are they're not home, right? And again, there's like kind of a proper etiquette for it, a politeness around it. But in saying that, listen, you need to know that that is not this in terms of what Jesus is getting at. And in fact, I think Jesus in this story would actually kind of flip the script on all that and say that for some of us, the biggest challenge is our tendency for politeness, our tendency for proper etiquette when it comes to approaching Him with this shameless audacity, the boldness that He's actually looking for. The confidence that where when it comes to knocking on heaven's door, we as opposed to just sort of knocking once and it didn't maybe go the way we thought it was going to, or He didn't respond in the time frame we expected Him to respond to. How many of us were just like, we knock once, well, guess He must not be here. But listen, if the Bible's clear on anything, is that you can trust that when you seek Him in heaven, you can trust that God is home. And in fact, there's John 14:1. There's a great passage where Jesus, before He leaves, this time on earth with the disciples, he goes on. He says, "Hey, you can trust me when I tell you I'm going to my Father's house to prepare a room for you." In other words, He's home. And so because of that, when He's sharing this story, he's sharing it with this encouragement to have the same type of audacity, the same type of boldness, knowing that God is home. Every time you pray, it's hitting home with Him. That it would encourage you to have that persistence and that shameless audacity to much like that man in that story, to keep coming back again and again, to trust God to do it again. See, it's this call that sits there and says, because I know that God is home. When I seek Him in prayer, when I'm praying these big prayers, when I'm praying for the miraculous, I'm not just going to knock once and go away and say, well, I'm throw my hands in the air, He must not be home. No, I'm going to go with the confidence of going, I know You're home, Jesus. Your word reminds me, You're home. My prayers are hitting home. So I'm going to, hey, you there? I know You're home, Jesus. If it doesn't answer once, I'm going to knock again. Still no answer. Jesus, I know You're home. If I got to look in the windows, I look like a stalker. I don't know. I'm going to do whatever I got to do to keep knocking until You answer, because I know You're home. I know it's hitting home. I know the thing that You've started in my life, the promise is You will bring it to completion in my life. If it's not all good, it just means You're not all done. And so I'm going to pray with persistence. I'm going to pray with an audacity and a trust in a God who promises to do it again and again and again. There's one more story. In fact, we see this kind of call to persistence and prayer actually throughout Scripture, and we'll end with this, but there's a great story of 1 Kings 18. Who God gives Elijah this word for King Ahab that after years of drought, that God is about to make it rain in the land. And not just like a light mist or, rain, not like a northwest type of constant mist, but rather a downpour. It's interesting enough, in Scripture, rain was always symbolic of the blessing of God upon someone's life. And so in verse 41, it says, and Elijah said to Ahab, go eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain. So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down to the ground and put his face between his knees. Go and look toward the sea, he told his servant. And he went up and looked. There's nothing there, he said. 7 times Elijah said, go back. 7 times Elijah said, go back. The 7th time the servant reported, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. I love this story for a couple of reasons. One is, again, we see that Elijah, the call upon Elijah's life when it came to seeing the miraculous happen. And I think this is important for some of us to hear, is listen, God didn't ask him to perform the miracle, just simply to pray for the miracle. And some of you need to hear that today. God's not asking you to perform the miracle. He's just asking you to pray with the shameless audacity for that miracle. But not just that. Again, his willingness to go back again and again. And in fact, it wasn't until that 7th time coming back, still it seemed like nothing was happening, nothing was changing, but he just kept knocking. He kept going back, knocking on heaven's door because he knew it was hitting home. He knew that God was home. He was hearing his prayers. And before he even could get back, all the way back, from that seventh time, before this guy gets back to Elijah, gets back to share the news, like it's a total downpour. And look, I share this with you because I wonder if that's not the call that God is trying to speak into your life today. This call to go back. Yeah, maybe you've been praying for that relationship to get better. And while it is improved, it's not where it needs to be yet. Hey, listen, the call is to go back. To keep going back, to keep seeking God again and again. Because again, if it's not all good in that relationship, you can trust God's not all done. So keep seeking him again. Maybe it's that loved family member or that son, that daughter who's gone far from God. And it feels like the more you share your faith, it just feels like the farther they're getting from him. Hey, can I encourage you? Go back. Keep loving on them. Keep praying for them. I'm telling you, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. Maybe it's that job situation. Maybe it's a dream God put on your heart. Maybe it's a ministry God put on your heart that you gave up on because, well, you tried it once and it didn't work out the way you thought it was going to. Can I encourage you? Go back. Go back. Knock on heaven's door again. You can trust it's hitting home. God is opening up some doors. He's making a way. A lot of times we want the miraculous to happen in an instant when in reality, most of the miracles in our lives, in fact, most of the miracles you read about in Scripture are often a process. Again, for Elijah, it was 7 times he had to keep going back. It was a process. Listen. Man, seek God with a shameless audacity. Look, you want to see God do the miraculous in your life. Listen, it starts right here. It starts with this heart and having a desperation enough to go back and to trust God to do it again and again and again. As look, I want to pray for you today, and I want to pray for a couple people. For some of you who, again, you've been praying for something, maybe again a family member or a relationship or a financial situation, and while it's gotten better, it's not where it needs to be. Listen, can I encourage you to, rather than just give up, throw your hands up, to go back, to knock on heaven's door again, to surrender it to him again. Listen, you can trust. The very promise of his word reminds us that he who began a good work in us is faithful to bring it to completion. But I also want to pray for some of you who, again, maybe for you, it's the call is even deeper and bigger than that. The call to go back is this call to go back to a relationship with Jesus. Maybe for you, maybe you started off strong, and then somewhere along the line, things didn't work out the way you thought they were going to work out, or in the timeline or time frame you thought it was going to go, and so you threw your hands up. You settled on less than the life he's called you to, and you decided to just kind of go your own way and do your own thing. And could it be that God has brought you here in this moment to call you to go back to this relationship with him? That freedom you're pursuing, that joy that you've been chasing after, that fulfillment and purpose you've been searching for, listen, it's not found in chasing after things out there. It's found in going back and pressing into this relationship with Jesus. It's in Jesus, it's in this relationship with him that we find the fullness of life, that we find things like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness. It's found in that relationship. And so if that's you, I want to give you the opportunity to not just surrender your life. Maybe you've never given your life over to Jesus. I want to give you that opportunity as well. But I think for a lot of you, it's maybe a call to simply resurrender. To recommit your life to this relationship with Jesus. By simply praying this prayer of surrender in your heart with me. Father, I recognize I've messed up more than a few times. but I believe you love me enough to leave heaven, to come to earth, to die on a cross, to pay a price in full for all my sin, shame, past, present, future. Because of which Jesus asked you to come into my life and to be the Lord and Savior of my life right now. I'm giving it all over to you. I'm looking to you to do the miraculous, to do what only you can do in this job situation, in my family situation, in my life. We give it to you right now. In Jesus' name, amen and amen.